Dale.
Hello, a very good evening to you. It's 8:02 on LBC. It's Tuesday's Cross Question. With me on the panel, to my left, is Kezia Dugdale, Associate Director of the Centre for Public Policy at the University of Glasgow. She's a former and recovering leader of the Scottish Labour Party. Next to her is Graham Stuart, Conservative MP for Beverley and Holderness, who's a former Energy Security and Net Zero Minister. To my right, we have Shevaun, Haviland, Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce. And to her right, Camilla Turner, Political Editor of the Sunday Telegraph. They want lots of questions on all sorts of different issues. I suspect you may want to ask about various things in the budget or various things that have been announced before the budget. For example, today, tourist tax, vast increase in minimum wage. How will those affect growth? You may want to ask about that, but lots of other things you can ask about as well. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player, the LBC app and the LBC YouTube channel.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's start off with a text question from Andrew. It's been reported today that the Chancellor is considering raising the minimum wage above inflation, with many employers still reeling from her last budget and the increased costs she inflicted on businesses then, which have damaged the economy. Is the Chancellor right to place even more cost now on businesses rather than let them decide for themselves what they can afford in terms of wage increases for the lowest paid? Shevaun Haviland from the British Chambers of Commerce, I imagine your members might have a few views on this.
They certainly do. As was pointed out there, our members are indeed still recovering, reeling, working through the costs that they had imposed on them around national insurance in April. There was also at that time an increase in the living wage. Look, our employers, people are their business. They want to have happy people. They want to have great employees. They want to pay their people well. But this is going to be another cost on top of everything that we are still trying to absorb, and more costs, and especially living wage at the entry level. It's not just about living wage at the entry level, it's about all the wage increases you have to push up the system, and that is another set of huge costs. And there are only so many costs we can keep absorbing. Businesses have stopped investing, they will stop hiring, they will worry about what they're going to pay their current workforce, and all of that is bad for business, and bad for business, bad for economic growth, right?
Is it the headline figure that you're worried about, the 4.1% increase, or is it the fact that they're trying to close the gap for 18-year-olds? So in a few years, they want 18-year-olds to have exactly the same minimum wage as 21, 25-year-olds. Because that, I think, for smaller employers, that's probably, it could be the straw that breaks the camel's back and could even mean job losses.
I mean, that is definitely a challenge, because if you're looking at employing someone into an entry-level job, you're more likely to employ someone with a bit of experience, maybe has a couple of years' experience into that job, than someone who's at their first job. That's just rational. Most of our businesses, they really want to employ young people. They want to employ people from their local communities. They want to give people their first job, and even some people who are quite far from the workplace. And all of that makes it much harder. And it's not just that entry level. Remember, it's the wages that you have to increase for their supervisor and their line manager and up the chain. And all of that is an on-cost. And when you've got more costs, you stop investing or you stop recruiting, because money only goes, we've got to balance the book somewhere, right?
Kezia Dugdale.
So I don't think it's a surprise that Labour government would want to increase wages, being the party of the minimum wage, to see that rise ahead of inflation in order to address the cost of living crisis is a very Labour thing to do. The problem is so many other aspects of this budget are not traditionally Labour policies that I worry about the compound effect on business for many of the reasons that Shevaun has outlined. This would have been quite a different policy to announce if it had come alongside an income tax increase. You could sell that better to the public, but we're faced now with what looks like, a picky bits budget, a little bit of everything. We don't know quite what the compound effect of that's going to be on, the small and medium-sized businesses, which are the growth engines of this country. And I do worry about that, because this Labour government can't bring down waiting times. It can't reduce the cost of living without a growing economy. And this feels like one more kind of struggle that businesses are going to have to carry on their back in order to achieve that goal.
And then you look at something like the tourist tax, and I'm thinking if a government is really wanting economic growth, those two things are not pro-growth, are they?
Well, I think they can be. So tourist taxes are pretty commonplace across Europe. The Scottish Parliament has already given local authorities in Scotland the power to introduce a tourist tax if they want to. Some of Scotland's
how many have?
So I think Edinburgh and Glasgow have both introduced proposals, but so far I think they're the only councils to do so. I think that level of local autonomy is quite important, actually. I don't think it's something that should be imposed on everyone automatically. But the ability for big cities like Edinburgh to raise more in order to improve the public realm that supports so many tourisms, I think is a good economic policy. It will lead to a better experience for tourists, and it means that your everyday taxpayer in Edinburgh isn't paying the cost of having the city flooded by 500,000 people every summer from their own pockets. In that sense, it makes a lot of sense and fairness.
Okay, Graham Stuart.
Well, to Andrew's question, I think putting the minimum wage up when we are already seeing employment going down. I mean, we've had 4 million additional jobs created over the 14 years of the last Conservative government, 800 a day, and every single month since Labour came to power, unemployment has gone up. There's 200,000 fewer people in work. Think of the 200,000 people paying tax, spending in the shops, paying VAT, all that's gone. And putting the minimum wage up in this way, I think, is going to hurt the businesses they've already hurt the most. We've seen 100,000 of those 200,000 jobs have gone in hospitality. And it's a double whammy. They want to put in the minimum wage. They're hoiking up for young people, for exactly as Shevaun says, that we're going to see fewer jobs, fewer chance to get on the ladder, to have that first job. And people who come into work, maybe they've had health issues. It's hospitality that does that. So a double whammy of a minimum wage rise with no justification at a time of falling employment, and then a tourism tax. You cannot tax your way to health and wealth. And Labour look like they want to test it to destruction. Last year's budget was a horror show, and now we've got Horror Show 2, the sequel. And as we know, the sequel's nearly always worse than the original.
Camilla Turner, what are the politics of this? Because Kezia, I thought, used an interesting phrase there, saying this is a Labour policy. And, OK, the Blair government obviously introduced the minimum wage back in 1998, opposed by the Conservatives at the time. But do you think the politics of this work?
Well, I suppose when we talk about the politics of this budget, there's two aspects to it. There's a budget that will go down well with the people, the general population, the electorate. And then there's also a budget that will go down well with an increasingly rebellious Labour parliamentary party. And I think every measure we have to see with that dual effect there. On the one hand, Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer are trying to keep an incredibly mutinous party at bay, throw them a bone here, throw them a bone there, take a manifesto breaking measure off the table because they were all up in arms about the briefing war. It's a bit all over the place. And at the same time, try to give some things that the actual people, the people of Britain will appreciate. And I think the overriding thing here for Rachel Reeves is really wanting to try and get some growth out of the economy. That's essentially what she has staked her political career on, and Keir Starmer being very closely tied to that. And I think for a chancellor who said that what she wants to have is growth, she's going about that in a pretty interesting way, to put it nicely, because so many of the measures we've seen so far have been things that business leaders aren't particularly impressed with, and are actually saying that far from growth, these are going to be pretty stifling and pretty difficult measures for them.
Do you think the fact that there isn't a single person around that cabinet table who's ever run a business has any impact on these decisions?
Yeah, it's a point that comes up every time, particularly with the employment rights bill. Every time these kind of measures that the business community aren't particularly pleased with, it comes up, this idea that how much real world experience do these ministers have? Yes, they're, maybe they're good at politics, but how much can they see the effect of their politics in the real world? And the business leaders I've been speaking to over the last few days have been saying that not only has this budget been an absolute nightmare from start to finish, and it hasn't even properly got underway yet, that's just the run up to the budget, but the other thing they're dealing with is the impact down the line of the employment rights bill, which is also another pretty difficult load of kind of red tape and another whole thing for business leaders to grapple with. Again, that's been a new introduction of this Labour government. So I think that's quite a lot of things they still need to address there.
Kezia, the Blair government was notoriously pro-business. and seem to understand business in a way that this government just doesn't seem to. And what can they do to rectify that?
So just when you were talking about the lack of business figures in the cabinet, I was reminded that Ian Murray, who was until recently the Secretary of State for Scotland, I know, but he is in the Department of Business, and he's got a brief around culture and AI and various other things. That's a man who knows how to run a business, and he would be very alive to some of the issues that we're discussing in the here and now. Look, I agree it's a shambles. I don't think you'll find any Labour figure that's prepared to say the last 4 weeks have been a good thing or that the party's any better off than it was. What I'm desperate to see tomorrow is some sort of coherent narrative from the party about what the story of this budget is, other than, as Camilla's already pointed to, trying to quell, the ill feeling on the back benches. It is a mess. What I will celebrate tomorrow, though, and maybe we'll come on to this in a bit, is finally the party looks like it's committed to scrapping the two-child cap. That is a really, really good policy, both from a child poverty perspective and an economic perspective, actually, because, keeping kids in poverty comes at a cost. It's the best return of investment you'll get is lifting 300,000 kids out of poverty in one move tomorrow. So I'm holding on to that as one bit of good news that could come.
Well, of course, it's overwhelmingly unpopular with the public.
That's not true. I've seen polling that shows that actually lifting kids out of poverty is incredibly popular. Graham, what polls are you looking at?
I'm looking at polls about the two-child benefit cap, and overwhelmingly the public, including Labour voters, Kez, are in favour of keeping it. Why? Because they know as the cost of living continues to bite, unemployment continues to go up, families who go to work every day are struggling to pay to have another child. And the idea that people who aren't working can have unlimited children with unlimited support from the state is unfair, and it offends people's sensibilities.
What offends people's sensibilities?
That's why it needs to be kept. And we need to grow the economy, Kez. We've got to get people, we've got to back those who work hard, and we've got to make sure we've got a system that's fair, not just in that artificial Labour being Labour way.
Can I just say, though, I agree with you to the extent that the public do not support a rising welfare bill. That's where there is evidence.
£3.5 billion just for that.
Yes, but there are other aspects of the welfare reform agenda.
The £5 billion savings they couldn't put through.
Where you could make significant savings. I'm just not prepared to make savings off the back of children living in poverty. There are other ways to do this.
But Labour has proven...
You mean relative poverty? You're not talking... I mean, I totally would support you on absolute poverty, but as I said yesterday, and got some grief for this, but little Johnny not being able to go on a school trip is unfortunate and sad, but that isn't my description of poverty.
Sure. So what I think this will do, though, is address a significant number of the children in this country who are poor because their housing costs are extortionate and they're stuck in private rented sector properties that they cannot get out of. Now, that is something that should exercise us all because it's the product of a broken system. That's the type of thing we can fix with this type of welfare reform. I'm not opposed to welfare reform in other areas. There are so many things that we could do.
The Labour backbenchers are.
No, I don't agree.
They wouldn't even make a £5 billion saving, would they?
I don't agree. They didn't like that particular proposal, but there are other ways of doing it. I think you'll find the vast majority of Labour MPs will be incredibly exercised by the number of young people in this country who are economically inactive and have been left to rot on benefits. That's an area where a huge amount of work around the welfare reform agenda could be done and a lot of saving made. I just don't think you should penalise the poorest kids in the country for it.
0345 6060 973. You can phone us or WhatsApp us on that number with your question for our panel. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC. It's 15 minutes past 8. We have with us Sean, just changed your sex there, Shevaun Haviland, Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce, Kezia Dugdale, Associate Director at the Centre for Public Policy at the University of Glasgow, Graham Stuart, Conservative MP for Beverley and Holderness, and Camilla Turner, Political Editor of the Sunday Telegraph. Right, WhatsApp question here from Matt in Burnley. Do the panel think there is a case for means testing the state pension? Graham.
Oh, means testing the state pension. I'm not sure that the triple lock is sustainable in the long term. I should make it clear I'm not. I'm a backbench Conservative MP, and it is not Conservative Party policy. But what we've got to be honest with people that we've got our welfare bill, of which pensions forms part, is out of control. And we have to live within our means. And having something which ratchets up automatically over time and which everyone feels politically committed to is difficult. So I don't think that you need to go to means testing. But what we have to remember is that when people say, well, we have one of the lower state pensions compared to other states, our system was never designed for that to be your primary means of sustenance. We had the strongest private pension system in Europe until, unfortunately, that great bogeyman, Gordon Brown, came along with £100 billion tax raid and helped kill that market.
You're insulting Kezia's hero.
Well, yes.
These are the best, Graham, aren't they? Still feeling out the lines from 20 years ago.
Well, no, but it's true, because the private pension system is important, and we've got to be honest about what we can afford. And so I must admit, I think that an inflation protection, not means testing, of everyone's pension would probably be a more sustainable offer for the long term, and therefore actually arguably a more generous offer than parties pretending that they can keep on giving something which ratchets up over time, especially when we have so many young people who are steeped in student debt, who are struggling for housing costs in a way that people my age didn't have to when we were younger. So I think there is an element of looking after everybody, but having some kind of generational justice.
Kezia, apart from the Gordon Brown bit, you were nodding through quite a lot of that.
I agree. I think the pension triple lock really is something that needs urgently looked at. We talked earlier about the need to bring down the country's welfare bill. That is a huge part of it. I think it's nearly 40% of the welfare bill and likely to get larger in years to come. And looking back at the history of the pension, the other thing, Graham, I'm sure you would acknowledge is the system wasn't designed for people to live 30 years after the point that they stop working. So it's fundamentally unfit for the world as we find it. It's going to take a brave government to unpick this, and it might be something that you need to do via some sort of royal commission with cross-party consensus so that it sticks for the long term. In some ways, taking the politics out of it is the easy route, but it's got to give. It's completely unsustainable.
Shevaun.
So, when the welfare state was invented, there were 12 working people for every one person taking a pension, and now there are 4 for every person taking a pension. We've got to have an honest conversation about the structure of our economy.
But no politician is willing to do that, apart from Graham. But he's not on the front bench. And doesn't matter which front bench it is, they will always say that the pensions triple lock is safe with them. And
we've got to find other ways. So, opt in on pensions through employment was absolutely a good thing. But we are now seeing suspected salary sacrifice on pensions being capped in this budget tomorrow. And that will not only stop people saving for their pensions, it will also add new national insurance costs to businesses at a time where they can barely afford what they're already carrying. And that will not help the situation at all. So there has definitely got to be a proper conversation about it.
Camilla, when you talk to politicians about the pensions triple lock, or indeed means testing pensions, how many of them are actually willing to be honest off the record as opposed to on the record?
Yeah, I think most a common sense view is that this is a massive drain on our country's resources, and it is just kind of unaffordable in its current state. However, as you say, the political reality is that is considered suicide to say that aloud. We have a big ageing population, so that's a lot of votes. And we could see, to draw a kind of imperfect comparison, what happened when Labour tried to make changes to the winter fuel allowance. That went down like an absolute bucket of sick, and saw Labour quite swiftly make a U-turn on it. But of course, everyone still remembers, they tried to take away everyone's winter heating. So these things go down really badly. And I think there's just no, either Labour, Conservative, there's no party that probably wants to tackle this head on and would rather tinker around the edges and try to make savings elsewhere in the welfare bill to avoid keeping, tinkering at all with this triple lock, which has become a kind of a sacred thing in politics. But I wonder if at some point it will get tackled, but it feels like there isn't much appetite for that at the moment.
Well, we're going to have to start telling people things they don't want to hear. And I think this arguably is one of them. And if you are going to do it, unlike the winter fuel, which was suddenly sprung on people, so understandable that everybody was angry about that, is go hard and go early and then go through it. And I think politically it could. I recognise the risks, but it could actually work in your favour, because if people think it's fundamentally true, you're being honest about it, and you were able to give an offer such as CPI inflation protection, because there would be significant savings compared to the triple lock, but it would mean that the value of the pension in real terms, not relative to earnings, not relative to 2.5%, but in real terms would be protected. And I think that's a pretty solid offer to make to people, while hopefully as maybe as part of a balanced package, you're reversing some of the measures which it looks like Rachel Reeves will do tomorrow, and you incentivise people to save more in their own personal pension. That's what we want. We want people to work, make sacrifice today, knowing that they're going to get repaid in the future by putting that away. It's a fundamental conservative thing. If it's conservative being conservatives, we appeal to people for deferred gratification. We say sacrifice a little today for the long-term good. And I hope that would also appeal to older people to say, look, really, you might want the triple lock, but do you think it's fair on your children and grandchildren if it's not sustainable? And that's what a lot of expert commentary says. And I think with CPI protection, it can be sold. But I recognise I'm a minority voice.
Let's see what Kemi Badenoch thinks of that when she's sitting in your chair there, Kezia, tomorrow evening, taking questions after the budget. Right, Matt, thank you very much for that. Rico is in Kingsbury, who says, is it right for the state to tell us certain items are bad for us and therefore we should pay more for them, but still let us buy them? Now, the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has announced an extension of the sugar tax to include milk-based drinks such as coffees and milkshakes sold in shops, but not cafes and restaurants, and have also lowered the threshold for products to be subjected to the sugar tax. Camilla?
I guess the short answer to that question is yes, I think that is fine to have things available to buy, so people still have the element of choice to go out to the supermarket or to go to a shop and buy a drink, but to have a different tax regime depending on what the government is trying to incentivise. It's the same as, lots of products are priced differently. Alcohol, cigarettes, we can still buy them, but they just have taxes attached to them. I guess, again, the balance here is how much is this a kind of nanny state measure telling people what to do versus, trying to incentivise slightly healthier behaviour, but without being too heavy-handed about it. And again, what is the impact of this going to be on businesses, on the economy more widely? Coming back again to that issue of growth, is this helpful? Is it not? If we take it as a kind of broad measure. I guess doing the carve-out for cafes and restaurants, I suppose, is helpful because it means people's prices of going out for a meal or going out for a drink doesn't change too regularly.
But they're already being affected, aren't they? I was told today that in Wetherspoons, I think it was, that if you order a hot chocolate now, because it's so sugary, they're only allowed to sell you one. You can't come back for a second. And in Nando's, which I'm very partial to, you can't, they've got to stop having refills. So you pay $4.95 and you can have as many sort of Fantas or Cokes as you like. They've got to stop doing that now. Now, Shevaun, I can't imagine a lot of the companies that belong to your organisation or member organisations, I can't imagine that they think that's a good thing.
Look, no tax, more tax is a good thing. It takes money out of the system. And these sort of things, you can have them here and you can't have them there. And you can have it on milk drinks, but you can't have it on another thing. It's like more complexity driven into the system. We just have to come back to the core idea here. And your listeners will totally get this. You've got to give businesses opportunity to grow, because growing businesses, you guess what? They employ more people have jobs, they have money in their pocket, and they pay taxes back to the Chancellor, and she can use that to pay for our teachers and nurses. So let's just get away from taxing and tinkering and focus on the upside. How are we helping businesses export more? How are we signing off more infrastructure? How are we helping, get skills to get people back into work? Where's the upside?
Kezia.
So the primary driver of this policy is not to bring in more income by the means of tax. It's to encourage soft drinks manufacturers, milkshake manufacturers to reduce the sugar content in their products so that they don't have to pay that tax. That's the fundamental principle of the sugar tax, and it worked really effectively before. Scotland's national drink, Iron Brew, reformulated its recipe so it didn't have to pay the sugar tax. I think this is a really good initiative, not least because...
But it didn't taste better, though.
Oh, that's how long do you want to discuss that for? I feel like you could, cause all sorts of drama in Scotland around that one question alone. But look, I do think there's an issue around milkshakes. There might be a lot of people in the country who think that giving their children milkshakes is a good thing because they want them to have the calcium, they want them to have an alternative to a fizzy drink. And the reality is it might have more sugar per litre than the equivalent amount of Coca-Cola might. So I think it's a good thing.
Unlikely.
Well, I think so this is a tax on 45 grams of sugar per 1 litre. So yeah, you're right, probably not full fat Coke, but other soft drinks may well trigger that limit. So I think this is a good kind of nudge type policy. It might encourage people to reformulate drinks, and it might encourage people to make different choices about what they pick off the shelf at lunchtime on their meal deal.
Graham?
I think the government should read the room. And Camilla's right. It's not a matter of absolute principle. The government does use the tax system to nudge us, to have less of things that are bad and hopefully...
But it is said that the original sugar tax, which I remember arguing against vociferously, everyone says that has actually worked.
Yeah, but read the room. The sense of the state it never knows when to stop, does it? So it just keeps going, messing with people who've already changed their formula. And I just think the government could do with just sitting back and just leaving things alone. But it just doesn't seem to be able to do that. And if there's a tax to be imposed, Rachel Reeves is going to be on for it regardless. And the state of public sentiment right now is, even if there's an argument for it, they're going to feel like, no, we don't need any more taxes.
Let their teeth rot, says Graham Stuart.
He's not denying it.
I believe in personal freedom, and I'm nervous about a state that goes too far. But then my dad was a consultant anaesthetist at the Cumberland Infirmary and was ferociously opposed to compulsory wearing of seatbelts on the basis of personal freedom. But once he'd seen it, said about the 17-year-old girl who'd gone through a windscreen, and it kind of changed his mind. So there is that's why Camilla's point's right. There's a balance here on principle, but does this government ever know when to stop?
Stick to water, eh?
Well, you could say that about the government you were a senior minister in, because, they went quite a long way down this road.
They did indeed. And as Kemi quite rightly says, the Conservatives go wrong when they're insufficiently conservative, and Labour go wrong when they're true to their principles.
And on that bombshell, it's 8:33. People often say, why do you introduce the panel after every break? Because we know who they are if we started listening to the programme. Yeah, but people tune in all the time. And there's nothing more frustrating than listening to the radio and not having a Scooby-Doo who is talking. So, Shevaun Haviland is here, Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce. Kezia Dugdale, Associate Director of the Centre for Public Policy at the University of Glasgow. Graham Stuart, soon to be known as Let Your Teeth Rot, Graham Stuart.
Thanks a lot.
Conservative MP for Beverley and Holderness. And Camilla Tominey, Political Editor of the Sunday Telegraph. Right, a text question from Scott in West Hampstead. Did I say something wrong then?
Camilla Turner, not Tominey.
What did I say?
But it is confusing.
I'm so sorry. I could have called you much worse. Right, Scott in West Hampstead says, is the American proposed peace deal between Ukraine and Russia a viable and fair plan for peace? Or is it quite simply an attempt by Donald Trump to appease his pal Vladimir Putin and sell the brave and long-suffering Ukrainian people down the river? Graham Stuart.
Well, it's not just the Ukrainian people who are being sold down a river. Ukraine is part of Europe. And if that sovereign democratic nation has parts of it taken from it by the aggression, unprompted and unreasonable aggression of Russia, then the whole of Europe, including the UK, is at risk. And I think somehow we haven't taken that on board sufficiently. And therefore, I think we should not be looking to see any part of Ukraine surrendered. Otherwise, we've had count this as the second Ukrainian war. If Vladimir Putin is allowed to capture and legitimize his taking of territory of a European democratic sovereign nation, he'll be back for more, and it'll be Ukraine 3. But it may not just be Ukraine. He's already invaded the airspace of Poland. He's threatened the Baltics. He wrote that essay 2 or 3 years ago, didn't he, of his sort of mythic vision of the greater Russia and all the parts that have to be under his control. We must stand with the Ukrainians, and we mustn't allow our fatigue and the years that have gone by to stop us having clarity about the fact it's right for them and we should stand by them, but it's also right for us. And we need to We need Germany, which is rearming, and other countries across Europe. We need jointly with them to be able to stand and back the Ukrainians so that they can win that war, they can retake their territory, because anything less is going to be in the history books as a historic error.
So why doesn't Donald Trump understand all of that?
Donald Trump has never seemed to understand that. If we had Ronald Reagan in the White House now, you know that he would be backing and he would be galvanizing.
Well, I think any American president would.
Exactly. And Biden wasn't that great, but he was better than Trump. But we need, typically we have relied on American leadership to galvanize the rest of the West to do the right thing, and Donald Trump has gone missing. So in Europe, we do need to, one thing Trump is right, we need to step up and take more responsibility for ourselves. I'd like to see Germany take more of a lead. If you look at it geographically, it's so close to that Ukrainian front. If there's any country that should be aware of the threat of being destabilized by Russia, it should be the Germans. And we, as to explaining Donald Trump's behaviour, I don't know. I mean, given that he did business in Russia in the 80s and given his personal predilections, who knows what compromat Vladimir Putin may have on him. I don't know, but it seems his behaviour has never struck me as being in line with US interests, let alone European interests. This is a European security issue, not just a Ukrainian issue, and we mustn't get it wrong.
Shevaun.
Look, we need to get to peace, and it needs to be the peace that the Ukrainian people want. I mean, we know they want to get back to, their country being a good state. We need security for economic prosperity, and that's what those people want to get back to. I mean, remember we're all suffering for it. Remember the invasion and the massive energy cost spikes for people and business, and we're all still suffering from that. But you're right. It is a European issue, and we need to back the Ukrainians to have the peace deal that they want, so we can all get back to, getting on with our lives.
Camilla?
I think that's absolutely right, and the what we've heard just now, and I think the kind of huge backlash to this Trump proposal did seem to move the dial a bit, in the sense that within 24 hours or so of the proposals being leaked in the media, we had Trump and White House officials walking them back and saying, this is just a draft. So I do think there is hope for some movement there, and reports coming out about later drafts seem to have swung back a bit in favour of Ukraine again, rather than the initial proposals, which seem to have just been...
Which means that Putin will reject them now, so we're back to square one. What's the point of it all?
Quite possibly. It seems like every so often there's a kind of hope for a ceasefire or a deal, and then it just kind of all unravels pretty quickly. But this one does seem to have a bit of momentum behind it. But, as you said, it could all just unravel, I guess. In order to end the war, you do need both Putin and Zelensky to be on side. And is there something that they will both agree on? Is there something that each of them can make enough concessions to actually bring about an end to this war? Otherwise, we're just kind of staring down the barrel of an indefinite conflict, which I don't think anyone wants.
Kezia?
So I think this week started with somebody in the White House going, we need a really good story for Thanksgiving. Why don't we give, a Ukrainian peace deal another go? And hence Putin and Trump get together and come up with this plan, which, let's remind ourselves, this morning at least, included ceding territory, which is currently Ukrainian, to Russia. It also included a commitment to ensuring that Ukraine could never join NATO. And it also contained a cap on the number of armed forces personnel that Ukraine could ever have. Each of those is completely unacceptable to Britain, should be unacceptable to anyone
and
across
excusing all Russian war crimes. Don't forget that one.
Well, sure. I mean, how many of these points in that list could have been acceptable to us? I'm not clear what is in the revised document. I'm not sure we've had sight of that. I certainly haven't seen it in this late afternoon. But it feels very unlikely that it's going to come to pass, Iain, for the reasons that you've outlined, in the sense that any redraft that removes those elements is not going to be acceptable to Putin. Thanksgiving's going to come and go, and this war, I'm afraid, is going to continue. We may very well be here this time next year in the same position.
Before we come on to the next question, we've got a comment here from from Lucy on the minimum wage question. She says, pathetic news today about the minimum wage. Well done. Minimum wage up by 46% since COVID. Who can pay that? That's 28 people in my business about to lose their jobs. What idiocy. Well, you repeat that over the economy if that's true, and that would be very serious. Right, let's move on to Sean in Preston. Sean, hello. What would you like to ask?
Hello, Ian. Yeah, my question is, should anyone be held to account for things they said when they were 13?
You're referring to Nigel Farage, I guess, who's denied having, quotes, directly having racially abused anyone while at school, after 20 people who went to school with the Reform leader claimed he did make racist comments at that time. Graham?
I don't think 13-year-olds should be held to account for what they said. This is a hit job on Nigel. Whether there was indications that he continued to express that when he wasn't 13, of course, that might be taken slightly differently. But I think we should take people at face value, especially when they've been in the public life as long as Nigel Farage has. I'm sure he said plenty of things which we would find reprehensible and disagree with, which he's not denying, as opposed to trying to find things from when he was a child and trying to pin him for those.
Kezia, can you remember anything you said at 13 that might embarrass you?
Oh, countless things, without question. I'm just pondering what Graham said, because I agree with you. I don't think anyone should be held accountable for what they've said aged 13. But your party supports holding them criminally responsible for things they do aged 13. So I think there is an inconsistency there. I think the big issue around reform, or the big story of the week, is less what Nigel Farage may or may not have said, all those decades ago, and more the fact that the Welsh leader of reform has just been jailed for 10.5 years for conspiring with Russia. That is an astonishing story that I think has had, and other broadcasters, of course, Ian, nothing like the coverage that it should have done, because it tells us so much about the character of that party and the people within it. That's what should concern us, their actions now, and that needs to be understood loud and clear, the length and breadth of the country.
OK, Shevaun?
I think any of us who've had a 13-year-old child would recognise that they probably shouldn't be held to account for the shenanigans that they come up with. But I would have thought...
I put it down to bad parenting, personally.
Well, so does my mother-in-law. I think that I'm pretty sure Nigel... There wasn't social media when he was 13, right? But there is now. So what I do say to my kids is, whatever you say and do and write down on the internet out there is going to stay with you for the rest of your lives. So you need to be really careful.
Camilla?
I think whilst on the one hand, we should hold our elected officials to account to the highest possible levels if they're elected representatives of the people. However, I think children will say all sorts of things. And as you say, luckily, our generation didn't have social media as children, which is a very different story for anyone growing up now. So I think whilst, yes, we should expect the highest possible standards of members of parliament, I think having a go at someone over what they said as a 13-year-old seems like we've probably got better things to debate, like what they've said and done as adults, for example, might be a bit more of a pressing issue.
I think also this story was around many, many, many years ago, wasn't it? But the Guardian seemed to have found 20 people who remember exactly what they heard from Nigel Farage at the age of 13, which I'm thinking, well, I'm not sure I could remember anything my schoolmate said at the age of 13.
I find it all that that child as well, it's pretty distasteful. I worry about 21-year-olds. They're definitely fully adult, aren't they? But when I was 21, I think my friends were 21. I'm glad there wasn't social media around. I'm glad people didn't have cameras all the time, because it would look pretty bad today. And I don't like it when we see people in their 30s held for something that they did when they were 20, because if it's a criminal offence, that's one thing. But if they've done something which is distasteful and then having them cancelled, I think it's pretty outrageous. So I think there are plenty of things to take on Nigel Farage and reform without trying to pin this kind of thing on him.
There was an interesting report out today that said that we don't stop thinking like teenagers until we're 32.
Oh.
I might have extended that a little.
Yeah, I think that, in my case, 63. Yeah. Right, we'll come to more questions. Sean, thank you very much for yours. It's 8:45.
This is LBC. See app.
Shevaun, Haviland, Kezia, Dugdale, Graham, Stuart and Camilla Turner with us. Simon says, Iain, I said some awful things as a 13-year-old. I can still taste the soap my mother applied. That's the way to do it. Right, let's go to another question. It comes from... if my screen would move, that would be good. This is from Millie in Hertford. Though David Lammy is getting rid of juries because it takes years to get a trial at the moment, wouldn't you rather your fate be decided by a judge who knows the law anyway? Now, the government says it has not yet made any firm decision on juries after reports claimed that the Justice Secretary will reform the court system so that juries are only used for rape, murder and manslaughter trials. Camilla Turner, they haven't confirmed this, but the fact that there's been a leak suggests that it is true, doesn't it?
Yes, I think so. Just that because they're not saying it's not set in stone yet, it just means this wasn't the day they had actually planned to make the announcement. That's due to be coming up next week. And I think when it does, I suppose, become official, I think the government will have a real fight on its hands with not only the judiciary, but also a lot of people in this country who will think that having a trial by jury is it's not only a very ancient tradition we've got here in this country, it goes back hundreds of years, but it's also, I think, really not to be kind of overly sentimental about it, but it really goes to the heart of what it kind of to our democracy and to a kind of a right and a privilege that people have to be able to appeal to their fellow countrymen. And for that trial by jury to exist as a construct. And I think here in Britain, we do have a justice system that's admired around the world. And yes, we have a massive court backlog that we clearly have to deal with and is a pressing issue for the government. But there are always different ways to do it. Some other proposals I've heard have been court sitting longer hours instead of everyone knocking off at 4 o'clock or whenever they finish, court sitting through the night, court sitting on weekends. There are multiple other things you can put in place where you don't necessarily have to dismantle one of the really core and ancient constructs of our entire justice system.
Kezia.
So if this were a fundamental reform rooted in a point of principle, then I would give it a hearing. And I'll say why in a second or two. But it's not. It's a crisis response to the backlog in the courts off the back of COVID. And that's not the way that you do seismic reform, which this undoubtedly is. It's enormous. It's not in Labour's manifesto. It's come what feels like out of absolute nowhere. Scotland has a bit of history on this, Iain. I don't know if you remember, but last year the Scottish Government tried to remove juries from rape trials in particular because there was a big move from people with expertise around the legal system who evidenced that women were far less likely to be believed by juries. The evidential bar was far less likely to be met by a jury than it would be just purely on the point of law. So the Justice Secretary in Scotland tried to remove juries specifically for rape cases, and the outrage from the legal profession was instant and enormous, and the plan fell away pretty quickly. So I'm with Camilla entirely. The legal profession in this country, I think, will respond very quickly and very negatively to this.
That's quite interesting, Graham, because you would have thought that the legal profession would want to keep it in-house and they'd be quite happy to have their own making these judgments. But the Criminal Bar Association, we're going to be talking about this, doing a phone-in after 9. I mean, they're vehemently against this.
Yeah, well, jury trials are a fundamental part of our democratic settlement. Criminal trials without juries are a bad idea, and not having those leaves you being judged by the establishment. Those are not just my views, those are the exact words of David Lammy in his previous guise when he was in opposition. And I think one of the things that has led to such desperately low popularity for this government is the hypocrisy on so many fronts. The promises last year on the budget, which they broke a year ago and they're going to break again tomorrow. The promise of being whiter than white, and then from frocks to suits to corruption ministers being suspended for corruption, transport secretaries sacked for being fraudsters, and Chancellor breaking, practically had no attention in a way that the Chancellor committed a criminal offence by collecting rent for a year without having licensed the property while tweeting saying we must crack down on landlords.
Tories never had any problems with this sort of thing.
But the point being in particular that people should paid the price for that. And it was the promise of behaving in a different way. And so I think it is rank hypocrisy. And David Lammy came out with these very fine statements. It's not just there's always a tweet, Ian. In this case, there's video after video of David Lammy explaining why jury trials are an essential part of our civilization. And now, apparently, it's sustained. His department wants to do it. It's no wonder everyone has lost confidence in them, because they don't seem to have any principles they're prepared to stick to. And I think that's the biggest problem.
I think this is, it's around the massive backlog we have, isn't it, and how long people are waiting. And I think it's a reflection of a lot of our public services that are struggling to deal with, this today, 2025. And there are good examples around the world. The Germans don't use juries, for example. They do use a judge, but they have a panel of 5 citizens who are there for 5 years, who are trained to help judge alongside a judge as the public. So there are ways around it, and this is only for obviously certain sorts of trials. But I just think it's a wider question, as what Kezia was saying, around how we look at our public services and whether they are fit for purpose in 2025.
Your argument, Kezia, about this being a sort of crisis measure rather than a point of principle, I mean, I hadn't thought of that before. And that to me, is almost the clinching argument in it, which I should be deploying after 9 o'clock. And I might quote you and give you credit for it, or might make it
I'll
my
listen
own.
in.
Are they going to use it that way? Because the same department made changes to sentencing, so that people on very serious sentences are going to have their sentences cut, rapists and all sorts of...
Well, no, to be fair, rapists would not have their sentences cut.
I think from memory, I don't want to... You as well.
No, see, now you're making my doubt myself, but I think I'm right.
Because I respect you, and I'm sure I normally expect you to be right as well. People committing serious offences, and let's leave rape aside, having it shortened. And again, because if it would have seemed to be politically, and I'd say this is a backbencher, the prison system was not where it needed to be, and we need to do something in an emergency to fix it, we're absolutely going to do a limited window. We're going to sort of bring forward guarantees and then return to the previous system once we've fixed it and built the prison places. And you could make a similar case here, but apparently they're not. So they make an emergency move, and it would be like income tax, which was brought in an emergency wartime measure and then lasted forever. So they're not even...
That was 1799, Graham.
Yeah, exactly, and it's still here. So that's it. That's what will happen. It'll be 200 plus years, and we won't have
we've
jury
got time
trials anymore.
for one final question from John in Somerset. Why do the panel think that there has been such a large increase in online hatred and abuse of disabled people recently, particularly since the announcement of welfare reforms? Could it be because of misinformation peddled by politicians and the media? Shevaun.
There's a much bigger problem here. There's the online hate and abuse is off the scale for people of all different types. There was also news today about Ofcom talking about online hatred against women and girls. I mean, but those of us who've got teenage kids, to come back to that, we're trying to navigate this whole system. We didn't have this when we were kids. We're trying to help our children with it. We're parenting in the dark. What is going on online is horrible and wrong. And what are we doing about it? Not enough.
Camilla.
I think that's absolutely right. It's a huge societal issue, the online abuse and online hate speech. I'm sure for disabled people as well as many other groups of people in society. I mean, the fundamental problem is people feel much happier and find it much easier to say something anonymously online that they would probably never say to someone in real life. So you get all sorts of hatred. And I guess it's difficult to rein in, really, isn't it? Because we have various social network platforms that people use to socialise, and they're good and to connect people, but they also have this incredibly dark side to them. And I guess it's basically just something that we all live with now.
Kezia?
Well, I think it's a pretty worrying time to be any type of minority in Britain just now. And I think disabled people are the real brunt of that online a lot of that is to do with how we talk about welfare reform in this country. We've heard a little bit of this attitudes at the start of the programme tonight, because it allows a perception to grow that disabled people are on the take, that they don't make any economic contribution. And the time I saw that most starkly was in how we talk about personal independence payment reform. Now, that is a disability benefit which is given to people to address the additional costs they face in life because they are disabled. It pays no link whatsoever to whether they're employed or not. The vast majority of people in receipt of PIP are working and making an economic contribution. So I think we're actually pretty ignorant towards the standing of disabled people in this country and what they need to thrive and the economic contributions that they make. And that allows people to be as intolerant as they are in all the horrible forums that you're pointing to.
Graham?
Well, online hatred of any group, minority or otherwise, is obviously to be condemned, and there's a sort of dark side to the internet, full stop, isn't there? It seems to bring out the worst in people in a way that they don't do face to face. I can say that as a politician, and many of my female colleagues, because Kezia used to be the Labour Party leader in Scotland, will have doubtless been subject to this herself. On the sort of benefits issue, I think just since Labour came to power, the number of people who are out, who aren't working and are not required to work, has moved, I think, from 2.8 million to 4 million. The benefit system is out of control. And that is, I agree with Kez to this extent, that the benefit system is part of the sense that there's something wrong. And if that then means that disabled people who should be treated with respect are somehow bundled up and seen as fraudsters when they're not, it's because there are too many people now on welfare and signed off from work for life who shouldn't be. And so we've got to get the system right. If you get the system right, then we can better. It won't eliminate people being horrific in their treatment of others, but it will help reduce it.
Jack in Leicester says, Donald Trump did that pre-Thanksgiving thing of pardoning a turkey earlier today, although he decided to pardon 2 of them rather than just the usual one. If turkey pardoning is one of the most American of state traditions, then what's the most British in your view? Shevaun.
Oh, thanks for starting with me. I'm going to go the other way around. Remember the 5th of November when we celebrate. Someone tried to blow up our state, our parliament, and we take Guy Fawkes, don't we, every year and burn him at the stake.
Well, that's a good one, actually. Yeah, you're right. Camilla.
Oh, gosh. The only thing that springs to mind, because it's imminent, is turning on Christmas lights, but they probably do that in quite a lot of places.
I think they've already done it, and it's not December yet.
Yeah.
Kezia?
Queuing, talking about the weather, waiting for the king before you're allowed to eat your Christmas dinner.
Is that a tradition?
Well, I think some people observe it. It's not one that happens in my house.
Rangers fans.
Nor mine.
Really? I thought it was a common thing people did, was they would sit down, watch the monarch, and then they're allowed to start having fun on Christmas.
I've never heard that one.
Maybe it's a Scottish thing. I'll check.
Okay, Graham.
Well, I quite like Shevaun's Guy Fawkes night, not least because several of the conspirators were actually from my constituency, and there's a marvellous sculpture representing them. But I think, given I go up and down Whitehall, the changing of the guard. I once had when I was in the old Admiralty building as a trade minister, we'd look out and after my morning meetings, suddenly I would see, the soldiers going out and displaying. It would lift my heart. I could look out at them and be proud of Britain. I could look up on the wall where I had this huge painting from Greenham Common, and which the art department was very surprised that I wanted in my office. But that's life. You need to have a mix. It had the little ribbons on the fence that the Greenham Common women used to communicate with each other. I just thought it was rather a good piece of art. I spotted it in the warehouse area and said, I want it. Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Anyway, right, thank you all very much for coming on the panel tonight. Now, at tomorrow's panel, we have the former Shadow Home Secretary, Diane Abbott, the Conservative Shadow Business Minister, Dame Harriet Baldwin, the TUC's General Secretary, Paul Novak, and the Times columnist, Fraser Nelson. But coming up in a moment, we're going to return to the subject of trial by jury, because as of probably around 2028, it seems that you're not going to be able to ask for a trial by jury unless you are accused of committing a really serious offence like murder, manslaughter or rape. this is undermining centuries of tradition. It's undermining our unwritten constitution, isn't it? Or do you think, no, I'd rather be tried by a legally qualified judge?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, Donald Trump says a Ukraine-Russia peace plan has been fine-tuned with few remaining points of disagreement. Sir Keir Starmer hosted a call of European leaders earlier, saying talks are moving in a positive direction. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's ready to move forward with the framework of a deal.
I'm ready to meet with President Trump. There are sensitive points to discuss. We have them still. And we think that the presence of European leaders could be helpful.
The US president says he hopes to meet the leaders of Ukraine and Russia when a deal struck. A leaked memo suggests only murder, rape and manslaughter cases in England and Wales will be tried by jury.